and never ever heard about testing, and certainly not anything that the bombs being dropped were by our own government out in Nevada.
We fought a war in our own country, a war that half of us didn't even know existed.
At 5:44 a.m. on January 27, 1951, a B-50 bomber dropped an atomic bomb codenamed Able above the Nevada desert. This was not a surprise attack from a foreign enemy. Rather, it was the U.S. government that commissioned Able and over 900 additional atmospheric and underground nuclear tests as part of America's Cold War defense strategy. Locked in an ideological struggle with the Soviet Union following World War II, the American government established the Atomic Energy Commission to further test and develop the deadly weapon first used a few years earlier against Japan. This early period of nuclear testing was a time of strong patriotic sentiment. Americans were taught to fear the communist threat from the USSR, and many were eager to prove themselves as loyal citizens. Utah in the 1950s was no exception.
They made us absolutely terrified of communists, that they were going to come get us.
Settled largely by Mormon pioneers in the second half of the 19th century, Utah and its people were heavily influenced by the LDS faith, which encourages its followers to honor and obey their government. Despite some initial concerns about their proximity to the Nevada test site, most Utahns accepted the Atomic Energy Commission as a necessary part of the U.S. defense and gave it no more thought.
My dad was a meteorologist, which studies weather, and, he never said anything about it. So I always thought, if something was happening, my dad should have known back then, but I don't think he even did.
From its inception, the administrators of the Nevada Proving Grounds were aware of the public health risks associated with testing. They set up model homes with mannequins near the blast to study the potential effects of the bombs on human communities. All these tests, as well as information about the level of radiation being released into the air, were kept from the American public. The AEC's patriotic rhetoric and continual dishonesty regarding the testing kept many Utahns in the dark about the true effects of radiation fallout. Despite the dramatic loss of livestock and high incidence of cancer in areas near the test site. It was not until August 12, 1977, when Gordon Elliott White, Washington correspondent for the Deseret News, wrote a story about previously uncirculated government reports regarding an excess of leukemia cases among civilians living downwind of the test site, that the issue gained wide media attention. White's article spurred several key responses, including congressional hearings in Utah to determine the effects of the testing and a lawsuit brought by 24 Southern Utahns against the U.S. government. Though the lawsuit was unsuccessful, it triggered a 10-year discussion in Congress, which eventually resulted in the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, legislation that offered $50,000 to Southern Utahns who could definitely prove that they were downwinders, people whose health had been adversely affected by fallout exposure. The compensatory legislation applied only to those counties in closest proximity to the test site, as had much of the media attention surrounding the issue. However, researchers like Richard Miller, who studied fallout patterns during the testing, found it quite impossible to geographically confine fallout. Later studies by the National Cancer Institute estimate that every county in the United States received some level of radioactive fallout. One by one, Northern Utahns began to realize that they too were victims, unable to escape the deadly winds.
In my probably mid-20s, I started getting sick. My immune system started to fail. And they kept telling me that, for the immune system to do what it was doing, I must have been exposed somehow to nuclear testing. It wasn't until another probably at least 5 to 10 years later that I found out what had actually gone on out in Dugway and how much of the clouds from southern Utah had floated over northern Utah. And then it made sense to me.
I got diagnosed with thyroid cancer in 1985. Well, I didn't even know where the thyroid was. And so it wasn't really until I met Carol Gallagher when she was here. You know, she was talking about the diseases caused by fallout, and, you know, she said thyroid cancer, and I just kind of said, oh, yeah, well, I had that. And that's when she started interviewing me. And I said, oh, no, I grew up in Salt Lake, not St. George. And that's when she said, you people are so naive, you think it stopped at a county line?
Despite increasing awareness of the extent of Utah's radiation exposure, skepticism remains.
Well, they're not going to prove anything unless they actually do the research and quit pulling the funding for it.
Or proof is the first thing to go downwind. And so then you spend all your time not just being sick and trying to get well and trying to stop it from happening again, but trying to tell the skeptics that you must consider this. This is a real possibility.
When invited to join a bill that would expand compensatory coverage to the whole state, Utah Senator Orrin Hatch responded that he was waiting for additional studies and research and would not presently support expansion, though he had championed the initial legislation.
Or at least what they could do, and this is the thing I really think is almost criminal they haven't done it. They know where those areas of high fallout are. Why don't they set up screening clinics in those areas so they can find them earlier and save people? First, to create more awareness that it went everywhere. Second, to compensate people fairly. And third, to work for a comprehensive test ban treaty so it never happens again.
As more and more time passes since the testing, northern Utah downwinders find themselves racing against their failing health as they try to tell a story that, half a century later, the government still refuses to hear.
I don't anticipate growing old. I mean, I don't think I'll make it to 65.
Wears you down. It just wears you down to see that people are going to keep getting sick, and it gets really hard to always be immersed in death and dying. And I think it's really important not to forget what happened so it doesn't happen again. Because, you know, if they forget and they don't own up to what the testing did to people, they'll do it again. And if people don't know what it did and what happened and that part of their history, they won't know that they should stop them, especially if a government uses fear.